Good morning, everyone. Michael Fanning. This is my warm-up 167. And this morning, part of my victory hour, was listening to the Ron and Don podcast, who had the beautiful Diane Terry on. Diane Terry is a real estate agent with Windermere. She is just a beautiful human being, and she was talking about the art of listening. And so I was listening to their podcast. And some things came up in there for me that just resonated, and a couple things that I just wanted to share with you is she talked about when you're listening, you really have to be present. And what present means is that you are engaged. And there was a podcast by Simon Sinek that I watched where he said that you don't have the right to say you were present. You know you were present when others tell you you were present, when you were there. And the most important part about an effective conversation is people will walk away, and if they've been heard, and Diane talked about this, once they feel they've been heard, they've established a connection with you. And so I want you to think about the last conversation that you had. How much listening did you do? And how much talking did you do? And when you were listening, there's a couple things. How intently were you listening? And we all have assumptions that we walk into conversations with, and they're based off our beliefs and what we're tied to. And so a lot of times, if somebody is talking to us and they go against what we believe, then sometimes our minds check out. And I loved it. Don said this, he said that sometimes what we do is, while you're talking, I'm reloading, right, with my rebuttal. And so when you're reloading in your mind and somebody's talking, you're not present and you're not listening. And so I want you to think about this. When you go into a conversation, I want you to remove all assumptions. I want you to have your mind be open. You know, you can even go as far as say, be open to everything and attached to nothing, because that's when you truly are aware and able to listen. The other one is this, is when you are listening, there's subtle things you want to listen for. And I always set my mind up with this before I go into a conversation, say, okay, what am I going to learn? What am I going to learn? Because when you say, what am I going to learn, it requires you to listen. The other one is, what are the pain and pleasure points that I hear in these conversations? And that's really, really critical. So when somebody has pain in their life, when somebody has pleasure in their life, those are things that are important to them, because they either want to figure out how to get rid of the pain, or they want to figure out how to get more pleasure. And when you can be a solution to something along those lines, it's amazing the connection that establishes from that. And so I want you to think about that when you go into a conversation. How well are you listening intently? Is your mind open? Are you dropping assumptions? Are you not assuming, right? And are you listening for the hidden and the subtle? My eyes can see the sun and the moon, and my ears can hear thunder, but that's not the big important pieces. That's the stuff that's obvious. What's the stuff that's not obvious, right? What's really there that we can dig into and have real conversations? And then the other one is this, Ron talked about this in there as well, and he said that talked about ego, right? And he says, well, sometimes my ego just gets in the way, and I think Don even said that too. Is that well, I would just want to tell people what I know, and here's what I would challenge all of you is to take a real close look at your ego, and this comes from Tom Bellew from Impact Theory. He talks about having a fragile or an anti-fragile ego, and a fragile ego is connected to something that has, a pinnacle, has a peak, you've reached the top. So for example, being the smartest person, right? Being the most healthiest person. Those, there's always going to be somebody better than you. And if that's what your ego's tied to, it's fragile. I mean, it can be broken and it's difficult. And so if you find your ego getting in the way often, you might want to investigate and see if you're tying your identity, right? Your ego is what you identify with, to something that's fragile. How could you identify with something that's anti-fragile? Well, you can identify your ego and say, you know what, I am a learner, right? My job is on any given day is to learn, is to listen, is to be a scout, as Diane would say, and listen to understand and not listen to respond. And what's amazing, as soon as you identify as that individual, it's phenomenal how all of a sudden you start being involved in conversations in a much different way. So I want you to think about that, but I am going to share, I will put the podcast link to the Ron and Don podcast in here. I will put the link to the Simon Sinek podcast, and I will put the link to the video by Tom Bellew from Impact Theory, because I think those three together really have phenomenal information to help us all with what's going on right now. Guys, we all need to be better listeners. We all need to be better listeners. I think my neighbor's going somewhere. I just heard his truck start up. All right, everybody, have a fabulous day. Be awesome and help somebody.